All right, everyone, welcome back to the FeelSwell Cultures podcast. We are so excited. I don't know why I said that so Southern. I guess it's from because you're from Austin.
I'm rubbing off on you already.
Yeah, it's rubbing off on me. I said podcast. Welcome to the podcast. We are so excited that you are here listening. I know maybe you're driving to work. You are, talking with your employees. You've got so much going on, but the fact that you took time to really listen in today, we've got Melanie, who knows all things chief of staff and has put it into amazing formats for you all to learn from and understand. We're just going to dive into Melanie Jones, her experience, what she's been up to, and how she's really supporting so many people. Because the chief of staff role, Melanie, like it is very, very important.
Yes, it's such an important role. It's so impactful for companies, for founders, for CEOs. It's such a big thing, and it's always so crazy to me how little awareness there is around the role. And so that's sort of one of my big passion projects right now is bringing more awareness to the chief of staff role, because you're right. When people have one, they're like, "Oh my gosh, how did I live without one?"
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you said, you're bringing your passion to it right now. How did you even get into it? Because listen, chief of staff, that's not for everybody. What was your story? What was your journey that has led you here and sharing this knowledge and information with people?
Yeah, so I have a really interesting story, a path to the chief of staff role, which I found with a lot of my chief of staff peers. Everyone has a sort of interesting story. No one really like goes to school like, I'm going to become a chief of staff one day. We all sort of fall into it in our various ways. But for me, I started my career as an executive assistant, and then was just pulled into a chief of staff role by someone who told me I'd be good at it. I had never heard of it, but I was like, sure, whatever. Sounds good. So I got pulled into my first chief of staff role. But then after that, there wasn't a lot of clarity and a lot of structure around the role, and I wasn't really happy there. I left and went into project management. I enjoyed project management, and then found myself still being pulled into this sort of de facto chief of staff role at a company that we didn't have chiefs of staff. Again, I still wasn't really clear about the role, but in hindsight, when I looked back, I was like, okay, I wasn't really just a project manager. I was a chief of staff, just not knowing that that's what I was doing. Because I was involved in a lot of communications things, a lot of cross-departmental team collaboration and organization. And then from there, I got involved in the startup world. Started working for this woman, Arlan Hamilton, who's an amazing investor, founder, entrepreneur, motivational speaker, educator. She's all the things. I always say she's like the ultimate multi-hyphenate.
Mhm.
So I started working for her. I was doing customer success for one of her startups. And then as that was pivoting, I fell into the chief of staff role for Arlan. And so from there, I was like, okay, this is a chief of staff. This is what I want to do. I love this. I'm going to like optimize the heck out of this. And so um, I served as her chief of staff for a while. I left and actually went to one of her portfolio companies, was a chief of staff there in a government tech company. Enjoyed that. And then Arlan was like, I need you back. And so I came back to working with Arlan and was pretty quickly promoted to the COO role. And then after this really big event we did, she promoted me into the CEO role.
Oh.
And so it's been a crazy journey,
Mhm.
very non-traditional. But when I look back on it, I can see how all of these things were sort of setting me up for success in a chief of staff role, but then also how the chief of staff role is so pivotal for like other pathways. And so you can go on to be a COO, you can go on to lead a department because you're hands-on in so many different things, and you're getting that sort of like high level behind the scenes hands-on view of all of the workings of the company. And so, with my background as an EA, as a project manager in customer success, it all just sort of like meshed. But
Yeah.
again, like you said, it's not always a traditional path. And mine certainly wasn't. Most people fall into it and realize that they're really good at it.
I love that. And you have to be good with people. So along that journey, while you're in all of these different roles, I mean, your leadership is so crucial. Let's talk a little bit about that because and maybe you can speak to specific examples or what you've seen, how does your leadership drive, change within an organization when you are in that chief of staff role?
That's a really good question because a lot of people, again, there is so much ambiguity around the chief of staff role. With the people that, well, with my personal experience and with the students that I teach, I'm always like, when you think of leader, focus on servant leader. And not only servant leadership, of course, that is so important, but even more so in the chief of staff role, being like an ally and finding allies. To me, it's like we need to influence people to get them to sort of understand where we're coming from, where we're going. And that's going to be the most effective way to get people on board. So that's really my leadership style and what I really advocate for chiefs of staff, because we're not, the CEO, the CTO, we're not like, you're just going to do it because I said you're going to do it. We're really in a position where we need to bring people along with us. And that's great education too, as far as like career development, being in a position where you are a leader, but not by just pure authority. You have to learn how to influence people. You have to learn how to really respect everyone's sides and advocate for the person you're working for, the company as a whole, but get people going in the direction you want them going in.
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, this is so, so good. And, something that I've been speaking about too. I mean, I was just speaking at HR Retail and it was on managing Gen Z in the workforce. So in the next 5 years, 58% of the workforce will be Gen Z, yet 40% of them,
Gosh.
they want to leave. And it's like, how do we get people on the same page and meet them where they are? And I think a lot of these other leadership styles maybe need to be pushed aside for a moment to look at how do we influence people? How do you motivate and inspire them? And it sounds like that experience and has led you here and people, are feeling very supported by that.
Yeah, it's definitely a new wave. I didn't realize the numbers were that high, but things are changing and there is a new wave of people who they're not just going to do it because you said so, because you're the
Mm,
boss, right? And
yeah.
even if they do, they're not going to be happy and there's going to be that turnover. There's going to be like low employee morale if you're just doing things because you're being told to do it. And
Mhm.
so that the servant leadership, the idea of influencing people, it's really a lot deeper. It's not like some sort of sleazy like persuasion type situation. It's like genuinely understanding people's motives and genuinely communicating, really effectively communicating the company's larger goals and then figuring out how you can align those two,
Mm,
right? So the employees, they're there for a reason. Usually it's more than just a paycheck. They can get paychecks at many places. How do you understand their reason and align it with your goals to really like accelerate the path forward?
yeah, absolutely. And I feel like you have so many different nuggets of how you've come up with your style and just what the chief of staff role means because you've been in so many different roles. And now CEO, you're seeing, okay, why do you need a chief of staff? So let's kind of dive into that and go that direction because maybe someone listening, they don't have a chief of staff, but they know they need one. And what are the benefits of having a chief of staff and how can that really support them in their growth and maybe take some things off their plate, right? They're still involved in a lot of ways, but how are they connected and really focused in when you have that extra support? What have you seen?
So a lot of people know that they need an executive assistant, right? This is pretty classic. Everyone knows you get to a certain stage or phase in your career in the business and you need an executive assistant. You need someone looking at your calendar, your travel, your logistics, all that good stuff.
Mm,
The problem is you also need someone who's strategic and can help you as a thought leader, as a thought partner, can help you with leading the teams. One way I like to look at the chief of staff role is that as a CEO, you need to be heads up. You need to be looking at the vision ahead and sort of charting that, but you need someone who's heads down, right? And that is the chief of staff. The chief of staff can be heads down, building upon your vision, executing your vision with the team, and making sure that they're all heading in that same direction. So
mm,
that's kind of how I like to look at it. As a CEO, you can't be in the day to day. You've got to be like guiding the ship forward,
mhm.
you know, and there's got to be someone in the back making sure all the other, crewmates. I don't know. I haven't worked through the analogy well enough yet.
No, but I love that. You said like head up versus head down. And
Yeah.
and if a CEO can look at that and really hone in and go, Okay, is my just simply asking the question, is my head down or is my head up? You know
Exactly.
what alignment that the shift that needs to happen, right?
Exactly. Yeah. And that's like there's so much that only a CEO can do, and they need to be doing that. They need to have that time, that bandwidth to be able to focus on the things that only they can do. Whether that's creating the relationships, whatever their strengths are, whether it's, speaking with the investors, the vision, but then having someone who's still there in the day to day. And then also when things come up, there's another really important aspect of the chief of staff role is handling crises. So something comes up and who's addressing it? Because as a CEO, you still got to keep going forward, right? You can't be distracted with all the little things going on. Another way that I like to talk about it too, and this is something I learned from one of my really early on bosses when I wasn't quite yet a chief of staff, but
You
essentially was,
were.
yeah. So we would say he makes it up and I make it real. And then we had another team that made it recurring.
Mm,
So he was, you can picture this for the CEO. The CEO makes something up. They have a vision, right? And then the chief of staff is the person who's making it real. You've got this vision. How do we bring it into the real world? How do we execute on it? Because you have a million visions and they're all great, but we've got to prioritize and strategize and then execute. And then there's the make it recurring, because again, the chief of staff is a strategic partner. They are tactical, they are hands on, but they're not doing too much administrative work, right? So then once you get this vision into the reality or into the real world, then who's, keeping it going?
yeah, absolutely. I love that. I mean, whether you're a CEO listening to this and you're like, I need to hire a chief of staff, or maybe you are a chief of staff already and you're thinking, am I in alignment with the role that I'm
Mhm.
playing in this business? You get to find out here too, just by asking yourself these questions. And Melanie, you're giving such great insight to what that role is on a day to day and how you're able to make it real, and then delegate the other things. Am I staying in my wheelhouse? And I think that's huge too. You mentioned something earlier and you said that there's going to be things that come up, right? And it's not always fun things that we have to deal
Mhm.
with, but how can that chief of staff drive that positive change within an organization, even when there's things that are going on that aren't so fun?
Yeah. So the important thing to me, and this is what I tell my students too, is to be prepared for it. There's going to be, something that happens. Maybe there's a natural disaster at one of your factories, or there's going to be an employee who says something crazy on social media. Like there's going to be things that happen for companies. And it's kind of cool because the chief of staff role, I always say it's a good thing and a bad thing that it is ambiguous.
Mm.
But you can really make it your own, right? So maybe you have some downtime and you decide, hey, I'm going to start putting some like policies in place for if X, Y, or Z happens. So you're prepared and you can kind of say, hey, if this comes up, here's how we're responding. You
Mhm.
get the buy-in from your executives, from your board. And then so when those things come up, you're ready. You're not scrambling. You're not trying to figure it out in the heat of the moment. So that's really the biggest thing is just being prepared for those. And a lot of chiefs of staff, um, we see the bigger picture and the details, right?
Yeah.
So we can see like, okay, this is what could happen. I always joke that I have like very high functioning anxiety because I'm worried about, what could happen. I'm
Yeah.
prepared for all of those things.
Right. And I think there's something, I mean, going back to even, mentioning that you are with Arlan now, like one of the things to bring up, I mean, she always says, get ready so you never have to, or be ready so you never have to get ready, right? And
Yeah.
it's that idea that we can really embrace, the things that are coming that you can't think about as a CEO on a day to day. You've got so much on your plate, so much on your head, and you really need to focus in on this aspect of like, where are these people? Where are their minds? How can we keep them towards that vision that that CEO has made up? And you're making it real. I love all the analogies and things that you've said today. One of the things that I think is really important to point out is, you've created a course that's the chief of staff training, right? And you've really helped people hone in on the specifics of what they need to do. Now, why did you create this? Like, what motivated you to package this all up and put it into a course? Were there challenges along the way that you experienced? What was it that you really needed to put this out there in a format that was easy for people to digest?
Yeah, so I'll give you an example. Early in my career, when I was in project management, it was really clear there were so many resources. This is what you do as a project manager. This is how you know that you're succeeding as a project manager. It was really clear. When I got into the chief of staff roles that I was in, there was never any clarity. There was a lot of, I know I need a chief of staff. Can you figure it out for me? Which is, of course, a challenge as an employee, not having a really clear job description or really clear laid out metrics. There's not a lot of clarity in the role. And so I just looked back on what would have helped me. Actually, let me add to that. I also realized how pivotal the chief of staff role was for me. I didn't have to get an MBA. I didn't have to, climb the corporate ladder. I didn't have to do all of these things that might have taken me a lot of money, a lot of time. And I was able to get into a really effective role, an executive level role that was a launch pad for me into a CEO role. I never could have done that if I didn't have the chief of staff experience. And so I really felt like a passion towards helping other people get into it because I'm like, if I can do this, then you can too. And how can I help like break down these barriers that people are having to get into the role? And then when they do get into the role, how can I make it easier for them so that they can avoid the struggles that I faced? And so that's when I just decided, let me put it into a course. I can take everything that I've learned. I have some strategic advisors or, there's my friends and colleagues that are
Mhm.
also current and former chiefs of staff that help me with it. And then looking at just a ton of the research, there is research out there about the role. There's a lot of different ideas and theories about how to be effective in the role, and just compiling all of that and making it really clear that it's how do I say this? It's not a role that you can just fall into and succeed if you are missing certain blocks, right?
Mm.
So there's a lot of strengths I had as far as relationship building, but I was missing some strengths in the data analysis part. There are strengths I had in coordinating communications across different departments, but I was missing things in like financial acumen. Like I didn't really know about cash flow statements and different things. And so there's a lot that as a chief of staff, you do need a pretty wide, it doesn't have to be really deep, but you do need a wide understanding of a lot of different things. And so that's really the basis of the course. We start with the history of it, the different roles that you fill. For instance, as a chief of staff, you're a trusted advisor, you're a strategic partner, you are a project manager. One thing I call it, you're a truth teller because you have to be the person who is telling the CEO, hey, I know this is what you want to do, but based on the data, based on, these conversations, here's what we should be doing. And a
Mm.
lot of people end up with yes men, or
Mhm.
yes people. And that's really not a good thing for you. So your chief of staff is someone who's going to a little bit challenge you in a good way to say, hey, let's also look at this. I know we have these blinders on heading this way, but let's also consider this. Let's look ahead at that might come up. So your chief of staff is a truth teller. And so the course starts by going through all of the different hats that you wear, and
Mhm.
then goes through the soft skills that you need to know, like that influence piece, the leadership, the problem solving, and then the hard skills, which are like facilitating effective meetings, all that good stuff. And then my favorite part of it is that we cover what you should be doing in your first 30, 60, and 90 days.
Mm.
Because like as you know with HR, there are certain milestones that are so important. And if we're just out there like thrown into the fire without structure, which is especially true in the chief staff role, you're not setting yourself up for success and you're not setting the company up for success. And so I've got a really clear 30, 60, 90 plan. I even have like a template where people will have a meeting with their boss, sign off on it, like, hey, here's what our expectations are for each of these milestones. Here's why I need to spend the first 30 days getting to know people. Don't expect, some slam dunk success on paper the first 30 days because I need to really have a deep understanding of the company. I need to understand the people. I need to be spending time in meetings and one-on-ones. And so just so that everyone's clear about what's going to be happening.
I love that. I feel like there's so many aspects in there of how you take your own experience, how people, there was just some gaps, just a few, right, that you had in your own, roles that you had before, and then to bring it all together. I mean, a CEO could be listening to this and go, "I have the perfect person. They may not have ever had this experience. They already work for me. Let's get them the certification so that they are good to go and have all the different pieces that they might be missing." I mean, this is huge. I mean, you're filling a gap that I don't think people have seen before because it's just like, oh, you go through this traditional path to get to chief of staff, and it doesn't have to look like that. I mean, look at what you've been able to do, Melanie. It's amazing.
Yeah, and that's a really good point about there's a lot of CEOs who have someone they can trust. Maybe they have a really strong EA,
Yeah.
but they're not so sure, okay, how would this EA function as a leader? How would they function with, looking over reports before my board meetings? There's certain hesitations they might have, or it
Mhm.
might not even be an EA, it might be someone else. But it's so important that your chief of staff is someone you can trust, and it's usually that comes first, right? Someone you can trust, but you're not sure they have the skills, as opposed to the other hand, someone who has the skills, but you're not sure you can trust them. And
Yeah.
so, yeah. And so I do think it's really effective for CEOs to, and I even have on the website, there's a place where, people can let their boss know, or I don't know how to describe it, but you can request professional development funds to explain to your boss, hey, here's why you need a chief of staff. Here's why I believe I would make a good one for you. And I want to take this course. And that's going to help me become one. And then in, 6 months, whatever the timeline looks like to transition into that role. But yeah, there's a lot of CEOs who, when they hear about this, they're like, I need a chief of staff.
Yeah.
I've got someone, but I don't know that they could be a chief of staff. And so that's a great use case for the course.
I love it. Yeah, I think that's most of our listeners. They may have somebody and they know that they want to do that, but they just aren't sure what they need to get there. And you're really providing that. So, I love that so much. You were so insightful in so many different aspects of just your leadership style, what you've gone through and the journey. I mean, it wasn't a traditional path. And I love hearing stories like that because it just shows people that may go, I don't necessarily have all the schooling or this or that or whatever it may be, but like you can still do the things that you want to do. And
Yeah.
here's an option. And I think a lot of these CEOs that at least listen to my podcast are very open-minded and they want to see people in different roles. And they may not need to have all of the skills at first, but if they're willing to learn and they can
Mhm.
trust them and they're open to it, it's a great opportunity. So Melanie, I would love for you to share like as we wrap up here, what is one key message, I mean, you want to leave like a CEO today that's listening about chief of staff, about the training, anything that you have that's just on your heart from what you've shared today. And then we can show people where they can learn a little bit more about it.
Yeah, I think the biggest thing to me is to get across the message to CEOs that this chief of staff is going to be a force multiplier for you. It's not just an add-on. When you have this person in place who is a strategic thought partner that you can trust, you can then go so much further ahead because you know that all of the bases are being covered, at home, at the office. You can get a lot further ahead with the chief of staff. So I really encourage people to learn more about the role in general, to um, I have plenty of resources on my website, elevationchiefofstaff.com, but there's a ton of resources online to learn more about the role and to really give it some consideration. It's just every CEO I talk to who hires a chief of staff is like, this is the best decision. I don't know why I didn't do this sooner. You see how helpful it is to have an EA who's handling your inbox and your calendar. Imagine how much more helpful it's going to be when you have someone who can help you with decisions, who can help execute on your visions, and you can just trust and they run with it.
I love it. You heard it here first, folks. Your life's about to get a whole lot better with the chief of staff. I love it, and I really appreciate you sharing your knowledge. I know that what you've condensed it into, it took so much longer to go through that. And for you to share that knowledge, it's one of the most powerful things that you can do, and mentorship and guidance for CEOs that are like, hey, I need this, but I don't even know where to begin. And I have someone, and all the things that we talked about today. So powerful, Melanie. And where can people connect with you if they want to connect with you on LinkedIn? Is that a good place? I know we'll link your website here so they can check out the course, but tell me more about where they can find you.
Yeah, so I'm on LinkedIn, as you mentioned earlier. I'm from the South. I'm Melanie Jones TX for Texas. So you can find me on LinkedIn, Melanie Jones TX. And then you can learn more about the course and about the Chief of Staff role in general at elevationchiefofstaff.com.
I love it. Thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. We will see you all, everyone that was listening today, on the next episode. And so appreciate you being here, Melanie.
Sure thing. Thank you.